Princess had never known defeat. In her 300 years of life, she had won every battle, every debate, and every game she had ever played. She was the pride of the Empire, the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. Her people stood 7 feet tall with skin that glowed soft violet in the darkness. Their eyes held swirling colors like distant galaxies, and they lived for thousands of years. They believed themselves to be the perfect species. Believed it most of all. She stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Council station, watching the stars spin slowly past the massive windows. Her silver hair fell past her shoulders like liquid metal, and her royal robes were the deep purple of nobility. Behind her, the doors opened, and her advisor Myra entered with quick steps. "Your Highness," Myra said, bowing low, "the human delegation has arrived." Did not turn around. "Humans," she repeated the word like it tasted bad in her mouth. "The Council truly expects us to compete against humans. The territorial dispute over the asteroid belt must be settled, Princess. The Council chose this method to avoid war." "War would be faster," said coldly. "We could crush them in days." "The Council forbids direct military conflict. You know this." Finally turned. Her galaxy eyes were hard as ice. "Then I will crush them in these challenges instead. It will be almost too easy." She walked past Myra toward the great hall where the competition would be announced. Her steps were confident, her head held high. They had conquered 12 star systems. They had technology that humans could barely understand. They had lived among the stars when humans were still drawing pictures on cave walls. What chance did a human have against her? The great hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species. Short, furry, tall, insect-like, liquid beings from the water world of. And there, in the center of the hall, stood the human delegation. Studied them with open disgust. They were so small, so fragile-looking. Their skin came in various shades of brown and pink, nothing like the beautiful violet of flesh. They lived barely 100 years. They had only discovered space travel 3 centuries ago. In the eyes of they were children playing with toys they did not understand. One human stepped forward from the group. He was average height for his species, with black hair and warm brown eyes. He wore a simple dark suit, nothing fancy, nothing impressive. When he saw looking at him, he smiled. She hated that smile immediately. "Princess of the Empire," the council speaker announced, his voice echoing through the hall. "You will compete against of Earth in 3 challenges over 3 days. The loser species will surrender mining rights to the asteroid belt. Unless," the speaker continued, "the loser chooses to invoke the ancient law of binding." Knew this law well. It was older than most civilizations, a tradition from the early days of galactic contact. If a losing party could not accept the shame of defeat, they could instead offer themselves in marriage to the victor. It was meant to build alliances between species, to turn enemies into family. No one had invoked it in centuries. Would never need to invoke it, she would win. The human stepped closer to her. He bowed politely, his movements careful and respectful. "Your Highness," he said, "it is an honor to compete against you." "Save your pretty words, human," replied. "You will need all your energy for losing." She expected him to flinch, to show fear, to lower his eyes. Instead, he simply nodded, still smiling that infuriating smile. "May the best species win," he said. In the viewing gallery above, Emperor of the watched his daughter with cold, calculating eyes. He had ruled the empire for 2,000 years, and he had taught everything she knew about power. Beside him, his generals whispered among themselves. "The human seems confident," one general observed. "Foolish confidence," another replied. "Humans are known for it. They think bravery can replace ability." Emperor said nothing. He simply watched. That evening, prepared for the first challenge. Her rooms on the station were large and comfortable, designed for nobility. She practiced combat moves in front of a mirror, her body flowing through ancient fighting forms perfected over centuries. There was a knock at her door. She ignored it. The knock came again. "Enter," she finally said, annoyed. The door opened and stood there. He looked slightly nervous but determined. "Princess," he said, "I wanted to speak with you before the challenges begin. We have nothing to discuss, human." "I think we do." He stepped inside uninvited, eyes narrowed dangerously. "I wanted to understand something. Why do they hate humans so much?" Hate laughed. "We do not hate you. We simply see you for what you are. Primitive creatures who stumbled into the stars by accident. You have no culture worth mentioning, no history worth remembering, no abilities worth respecting." Listened quietly. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "That is what I thought you would say," he said. "But I wonder if you actually believe it, or if it is just what you have been taught to believe." "How dare you?" "I mean no disrespect, Princess. I am only curious." He looked around her room at the ancient weapons on the walls, the star charts showing the Empire's territory. "Your people have achieved great things, but so have mine. We just achieved them differently. There is no comparison between us." "Maybe not," agreed. "But that is what these challenges will decide, is it not?" He bowed again. "I will see you tomorrow, Your Highness. Sleep well." He left before she could respond. Stood alone in her room, her hands shaking with anger. No one had ever spoken to her that way. No one had ever questioned her beliefs so calmly, so directly. The human had looked at her like she was an equal, not a superior. It was unacceptable. She would destroy him in the challenges. She would prove to the entire galaxy that humans were exactly what she said they were, and that smile would finally disappear from his face. The next morning, the great hall was transformed into a battle arena. Floating platforms hung in the air, connected by bridges of light. Weapons of energy and force waited at various points. Thousands of spectators watched from the galleries. Entered from one side, wearing light armor that glowed with technology. Her sword was made of pure crystallized energy, a weapon her family had carried for generations. Entered from the other side. He wore simple protective gear and carried a standard human combat blade. The council speaker raised his hand. "The first challenge is combat. You will fight until one of you surrenders or is unable to continue. Begin." Moved like lightning. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, her sword singing through the air, barely managed to block her first strike. The force of the impact sent him sliding backward. She was faster than him, stronger than him. Her reflexes, sharpened by 3 centuries of training, predicted his every move before he made it. She struck again and again, driving him across the platforms, not giving him a moment to breathe. The gallery cheered. The humans watched in worried silence. Fought with everything he had, but it was not enough. After 20 minutes, knocked the sword from his hand and pressed her blade to his throat. "Surrender," she commanded. He looked up at her, breathing hard, sweat running down his face, but he was still smiling. "I surrender," he said. The hall erupted in applause, stepped back, her victory complete. She had proven what everyone already knew. Humans could not compete with the 1 challenge down, 2 to go. As walked off the arena floor, caught him looking back at her. His smile had not changed. It was not the smile of a defeated man. It was the smile of someone who had learned exactly what he wanted to learn. For the first time, felt a small flicker of uncertainty. She ignored it. Tomorrow would bring another victory, and then another after that. There was no way she could lose. The morning of the second challenge arrived with feeling confident. She had won the combat challenge easily, just as she had expected. The human had fought well for his species, she admitted privately, but fighting well was not the same as winning. In the end, strength and speed and centuries of training had proven superior. Today's challenge was different. Today they would test the mind. The council had prepared a scientific problem for them to solve. It was a famous puzzle, a quantum paradox that had confused the greatest scientists of 100 civilizations for thousands of years. The equation seemed impossible. Every solution created new contradictions. Every path led to dead ends. Had studied this paradox for decades. She knew every theory, every approach, every failed attempt. She had not solved it herself, but she understood it better than almost anyone in the galaxy. As she entered the testing chamber, she saw already there. He sat at his workstation, studying the holographic display of the equation. He still wore that calm expression, that gentle smile that made her want to break something. "Good morning, Princess," he said. She ignored him and took her place at her own workstation. The council speaker appeared on a screen above them. The second challenge is problem solving. Before you is the quantum resonance paradox. You have 4 hours to find a solution. The first to solve it wins. If neither solves it, the result will be judged by how close each came to a solution. Begin. Fingers flew across her controls. She pulled up data, ran simulations, applied the mathematical principles that they had perfected over. Her mind worked like a machine, processing variables at incredible speed. She checked on after the first hour. He was sitting quietly, staring at the equation with a strange look on his face. He had barely touched his controls. He is already giving up, she thought. Good. By the second hour, had eliminated 60% of possible solutions. She was narrowing down the answer, getting closer with every calculation. The method was working perfectly. She checked on again. He was drawing something on a physical piece of paper. Paper. Humans still use such primitive tools. He was sketching shapes, making notes in his own language, mumbling to himself. What a waste of time. By the third hour, had found a promising path. Her solution was not complete, but she was closer than anyone had ever been. The judges were already impressed, whispering among themselves in the gallery. Then stood up. "I have the answer," he said. The entire chamber went silent. Impossible breathed. Walked to the central display and began entering his solution. The numbers and symbols flowed onto the screen, watched with growing disbelief. His approach was completely wrong. He had ignored all the established methods. He had broken rules that everyone knew could not be broken. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. The system, his solution. Green lights flashed. The council speaker stared at the results for a long moment before speaking. The solution is correct. The human wins the second challenge. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs, stood frozen at her station. This was not possible. She had followed every rule, used every technique, applied centuries of knowledge. How could a human, using paper and imagination, find an answer she could not find? "How?" she demanded, crossing the room to face him. "How did you solve it?" Looked at her with those warm brown eyes. "I did not try to solve it the way everyone else has tried," he explained. "Everyone looks at this paradox and sees a mathematical problem. They try to force it into equations and formulas, but I looked at it differently." Differently how? I asked myself a question. What if the paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a perspective to be changed? What if the contradiction only exists because we are looking at it the wrong way? Shook her head. "That makes no sense." "Maybe not to thinking," said gently. "Your people are brilliant. Your minds can calculate things humans can barely imagine. But sometimes calculating is not the same as understanding. Sometimes you have to feel your way to an answer instead of thinking your way there." "Feel your way," repeated the words like they were poison. "Science is not about feelings." "No," agreed, "but creativity is, and sometimes science needs creativity to move forward." He bowed politely and walked away, leaving standing alone with her perfect methods and her incomplete solution. That night could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in her mind. She had been so sure of her victory. She had followed every rule, taken every correct step, and she had lost. Lost to a human. The shame burned in her chest like fire. Her door chimed. She ignored it. It chimed again. "Go away," she called. "Your Highness," Myra's voice came through the speaker. "Your father wishes to speak with you." Blood went cold. She rose from the bed, straightened her robes, and activated the communication screen. Emperor's face appeared, hard and cold as always. He said nothing for a long moment, simply staring at his daughter with those ancient, judging eyes. "You lost," he finally said. "The challenges are not over, father. I will win tomorrow." "Will you?" His voice was like ice. "You lost to a human, a creature whose entire species has existed for less time than you have been alive. Do you understand what this means for our empire?" "I understand, father." "I wonder if you do." He leaned closer to the screen. "If you lose tomorrow, you will invoke the binding. You will marry the human." His heart stopped. "Father, no. It is not a request. They cannot be seen losing to humans. We cannot give up the asteroid belt to such primitive creatures. The shame would follow our empire for generations." "But marrying one of them is a private shame," Emperor interrupted. "A sacrifice you will make for your people. The marriage will be seen as an alliance, a gesture of strength, not weakness. We will control the story. And if I win tomorrow?" Then this conversation never happened. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "But you will not lose. You are my daughter. You will find a way to win, or you will pay the price for your failure." The screen went dark. Sat in the darkness for a long time. Her mind raced through possibilities, strategies, desperate plans. Tomorrow's challenge was diplomacy. She would have to negotiate a peace treaty with an artificial intelligence designed to be impossibly stubborn. It was a test of persuasion, of understanding, of reading others and finding common ground. It was the challenge she was least prepared for. They did not negotiate. They commanded. They conquered. They told other species what to do, and other species obeyed. Diplomacy was a tool of the weak, something lesser civilizations used because they could not take what they wanted by force. Had never needed to persuade anyone of anything. She had never needed to understand how others thought or what they wanted. She had simply been right, and others had followed. But was different. He had looked at her and seen something she had not expected. He had spoken to her as an equal, questioned her beliefs, and beaten her at a challenge she should have won easily. For the first time in 300 years, was afraid. She tried to tell herself it was just one loss. She told herself that humans got lucky sometimes, that his victory was an accident, a fluke that would not be repeated. But deep down she knew the truth. Had beaten her because he thought differently. He saw the universe differently. And in the challenge tomorrow, that difference might matter more than all her strength and intelligence combined. As the station's artificial night cycle deepened, made a decision. She could not change who she was overnight. She could not suddenly learn to think like a human, but she could prepare. She could study. She could try to understand what made this strange, smiling human so dangerous. She pulled up every file she could find on human history, culture, and psychology. She read about their wars and their peace treaties. She studied their art and their literature. She watched recordings of human diplomats in action, nodding their techniques, their expressions, their words. By morning, she had not slept at all. But she had learned something important. Humans were not primitive or foolish. They were just different. They had survived against impossible odds not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they could adapt. They could change. They could look at any situation and find a way through it that no one else would think of. Had that ability, and today would face it again. She dressed carefully, choosing robes of deep blue instead of her usual purple. She looked at herself in the mirror. For 300 years, she had seen only confidence in that reflection. Today, she was not sure what she saw. The doors opened, and Myra entered. "It is time, Your Highness." Nodded, she took one last look at herself, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the great hall. Whatever happened today, her life would never be the same. The wedding was held beneath a sky of purple stars. The palace had hosted thousands of celebrations over its 10,000-year history, but none like this. The halls were decorated in black, the color of mourning. The guests spoke in whispers, their faces showing shock and shame. Princess stood at the altar in a black gown that swept the floor like shadow. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her galaxy eyes held no light. She had not smiled in weeks, not since the day she lost the third challenge. The diplomacy test had been her final hope. She had tried everything she knew, used every argument, presented every logical case. The AI had rejected every proposal. It had been designed to resist traditional negotiation, to push back against force and logic and demand. And then had sat down and talked to it like a friend. He had told stories. He had made jokes. He had asked the AI about its own thoughts and feelings, treating it like a living being instead of a program. He had spoken about his grandmother's garden on Earth, about the flowers she grew and the lessons she taught him about patience and care. Still did not understand how that had worked, but the AI had accepted his treaty in less than an hour. Now she stood in the great hall of her ancestors, about to marry the human who had defeated her. Her father watched from his throne, his face carved from stone. The court watched from the galleries, their judgment hanging in the air like poison. Entered from the opposite end of the hall. He wore white, the human color of joy and celebration. It seemed like an insult against the black that surrounded him, but as he walked toward her, saw that his eyes held no joy. They held something else, something she could not name. The ceremony was short. Weddings did not need words or promises. The couple simply joined hands while the priest activated an ancient energy field that bound their life forces together. It was a permanent connection, unbreakable by any known technology. When their hands touched, felt a strange warmth flow through her. His human skin was so different from her own, soft and warm where hers was cool and smooth. His fingers were shorter, his grip gentle but steady. She pulled away as soon as the ceremony allowed. The reception was worse. Nobles approached to offer false congratulations, their words kind but their eyes mocking. Stood beside her new husband, answering questions with single words, counting the minutes until she could escape. Handled everything with calm grace. He bowed correctly, spoke politely, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about each person he met. When nobles insulted him in the ancient tongue, assuming he could not understand, he responded in perfect grammar. "Your accent is from the northern province," he said to one surprised lord. "I learned from recordings of the great poet. His work is beautiful." The noble had no response. By the end of the evening, was exhausted. She led to their assigned quarters in the royal wing, a large suite of rooms that had once belonged to her grandmother. The servants had divided the space with screens and curtains, creating two separate living areas. "This is your side," said, pointing. "Stay there. Do not cross into my space without permission. Do not speak to me unless necessary. Do not expect anything from this marriage except survival." Nodded, "As you wish, princess." She walked to her side of the room and pulled the curtain closed between them. The first month was silent torture. Went about her royal duties, attending council meetings and receiving diplomats, but everyone knew about her marriage. Everyone looked at her with pity or contempt. The great princess, brought low by a human. She refused to eat meals with. She refused to acknowledge him in public. When they passed each other in their shared quarters, she looked through him like he was invisible, but did not seem to mind. He spent his days learning. He read books from the palace library, thousands of years of history and philosophy. He attended cultural events, sitting quietly in the back and watching everything with those observant brown eyes. He practiced calligraphy until his strokes were nearly perfect. Watched him secretly, confused by his behavior. He was her punishment, her shame made flesh. He should be angry or bitter or afraid. Instead, he seemed genuinely fascinated by everything around him. One evening, she found him in the palace garden, sitting beside a pool of silver water. The twin moons of the cast purple shadows across his face. "You should be inside," she said. "The night air is cold for humans." "I do not mind," he replied without turning. "The stars look different here. More colors. On Earth they are mostly white." "Why do you care about our stars? Why do you care about anything in this place?" Finally looked at her. "Because it is beautiful. Your world is beautiful. Your culture is beautiful. Just because I am a prisoner here does not mean I cannot appreciate what surrounds me." "You are not a prisoner." "No," he smiled gently. "Then what am I?" She had no answer. Weeks passed. The palace settled into an uncomfortable routine, ignored her husband, and her husband continued to learn everything he could about her people. Then the messages started. They came from the outer territories, from military commanders and colonial governors. Unrest was growing in the empire. News of loss had spread, and it had given hope to species that had conquered long ago. If a human could defeat a princess, perhaps the empire was not as invincible as it seemed. "We need to strengthen our borders," General argued at the council meeting. "Show force. Remind the galaxy who we are." "Force will only breed more resistance," another advisor countered. "We should negotiate, offer better terms to the colonies." Emperor listened in silence. His health had been failing in recent months, his ancient body finally beginning to weaken. He said little at council meetings now, leaving decisions to his advisors and his daughter. Felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her. The empire was changing, and she did not know how to change with it. The old ways, the ways of strength and dominance, did not seem to be working anymore. One night, she found reading a report about the colonial unrest. He sat in the common area between their spaces, holographic files spread around him. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Those are classified documents." "I have clearance," he said calmly. "As your consort, I have access to most government information, your father's law." "You should not be reading about empire business." "Why not?" He looked up at her, genuinely curious. "I am part of the empire now, am I not? Your problems are my problems." "You are a human. These matters do not concern you." Set down the report. "I understand that you hate me. I understand that this marriage is a punishment for you. But I am here now, and I am not going anywhere. We can spend our lives ignoring each other, or we can try to find some way to work together." "Work together," she laughed bitterly. "What could you possibly offer the empire?" "A different perspective," he said simply. "I have been reading your history for months now. Do you know what I have learned? Your empire is very good at conquering. It is very good at controlling. But it is not very good at understanding. You look at other species and see threats or tools or obstacles. You do not see partners." "We do not need partners." "Maybe not in the past, but the galaxy is changing. Species are connecting, trading, forming alliances. The old ways of empire are fading, and the will need to adapt or be left behind." Wanted to argue, to dismiss his words as human foolishness, but something in his voice stopped her. He was not attacking her people. He was trying to help them. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. "We treated your species like insects. We look down on you, insult you, mock everything you are. Why would you want to help us?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that gentle smile she had hated for so long. "My grandmother used to say that the people who hurt you the most are usually the ones who need kindness the most," he said. "I do not think they are cruel because they enjoy cruelty. I think they are cruel because they have forgotten how to be anything else. And I think you are tired of it." She stared at him. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked past her anger and her pride and seen something underneath. For the first time since their wedding, she did not know what to say. She turned and walked back to her side of the room, pulling the curtain closed, but she did not sleep for a long time. And when she finally drifted off, she dreamed of stars that were not white, but full of colors she had never seen before. 6 months had passed since the wedding. The palace had grown used to the strange sight of a human walking its ancient halls. Servants no longer stared. Guards no longer watched his every move. Had become like furniture, present but unremarkable. But things were changing in ways no one could see. Had started eating breakfast in the common area of their quarters. She told herself it was for convenience, nothing more. But every morning would be there, reading or writing or simply watching the sunrise through the tall windows. They would sit in silence, the only sounds the clink of cups and the rustle of pages. Sometimes the silence broke. "What are you reading today?" asked one morning. Held up the book. It was a collection of ancient poetry, written before the empire existed, when her people were still young and full of wonder. "The poet," he said. "She wrote about loss and longing, very beautiful but very sad. You understand the old language?" "I have been studying. There are sounds that human throats cannot make, but I can read it well enough." Looked at him differently after that. A human learning the old tongue was like a child trying to climb a mountain. It should have been impossible. Yet here he was, reading poetry that many had never bothered to study. The conversations continued. Small things at first, the weather, the news, the quality of the food, but slowly they grew deeper. Asked questions about history that no one had asked before. He wanted to know not just what had happened, but why. What had her people been thinking? What had they been feeling? "We do not discuss feelings," said one evening. "It is considered weakness." "That is strange," replied. "On Earth, understanding feelings is considered wisdom." "Then perhaps that is why humans are so chaotic." "Perhaps, or perhaps that is why we have survived despite being so weak." She had no answer for that. The attack came on a night when both moons were dark. Woke to the sound of her door sliding open. She reached for the weapon she kept beside her bed, but before she could grab it, a shadow moved toward her. She saw the glint of a knife, felt hands reaching for her throat. Then another shadow crashed into the first. There was a grunt, a struggle, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Finally grabbed her weapon and activated the lights. Was on the ground, wrestling with a masked figure in black. Another attacker lay unconscious near the door. A third was struggling to rise, blood running from his nose. The assassin on top of raised his knife. Did not think, she fired. The attacker fell. Pushed the body away and stood, breathing hard. Blood ran down his arm from a deep cut in his shoulder. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. "Am I hurt?" Could not believe the question. "You are the one bleeding." "It is not deep. I have had worse." The palace guards finally arrived, flooding into the room with weapons drawn. They secured the attackers, checked every corner, surrounded the princess with protective shields. Through it all stood quietly to the side, holding a cloth to his wound, saying nothing. Later, after the guards had taken the attackers away and the doctors had come and gone, sat beside in the medical wing. His shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling. He looked exhausted but at peace. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "They were trying to kill me. You could have stayed hidden." "They broke into your room. I heard them. I could not just let them hurt you." "But they could have killed you." Smiled weakly. "Yes, but they did not." Shook her head. "I do not understand you, human. I have treated you terribly. I have ignored you, insulted you, made you feel unwelcome in your own home. Why would you risk your life for me?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "On the night we met, you asked me why humans were so confident when we had so little reason to be. I did not answer then, but I will answer now. We are confident because we have to be. Humans are small and weak and short-lived. We have no empires that last for. We have no technology that makes us invincible. All we have is each other. He looked at her with those warm brown eyes that she no longer found annoying. When a human makes a connection with another person, that connection matters. It becomes part of who we are. You are my wife. I know it is just words to you. I know this marriage is a punishment. But to me, it means something. I could not let those people hurt you because protecting you is what I am supposed to do. Tears prickled its eyes. She had not cried in decades. I do not deserve your protection, she whispered. Maybe not, agreed, but you have it anyway. The investigation revealed that the assassins were radicals from the court, nobles who believed marriage had humiliated the empire. They had planned to kill her human husband first, then force her to take a proper consort. When had fought back, disrupting their plan, they had tried to kill him instead. The court was shocked, not by the assassination attempt, which was sadly common in politics, but by what had done. A human had fought 3 trained assassins and survived. A human had protected a princess with his own body. Whispers spread through the palace. Maybe the human was not as weak as they thought. Maybe there was more to him than met the eye. Notice the change. Servants began bowing with genuine respect. Guards nodded as he passed. Even some nobles, the ones who had mocked him for months, began treating him with careful courtesy. She also noticed a change in herself. She started seeking out, not avoiding him. She asked for his opinion on matters of state and found his insights surprisingly valuable. He saw problems from angles she had never considered, offered solutions she would never have imagined. The colonies are angry because they feel invisible, he told her one evening as they reviewed reports together. The empire treats them like resources, not partners. What if you sent someone to listen to them? Not to negotiate or demand, just to listen. Just to listen, frowned. What would that accomplish? You would learn what they actually want. Sometimes that is different from what they say they want. And sometimes just feeling heard is enough to calm people down. Thought about this. It went against everything she had been taught. The empire did not listen. The empire commanded, but the old ways were not working. Maybe it was time to try something new. She sent diplomats to the troubled colonies, not generals or governors, but young officials trained in listening and understanding. The reports that came back were surprising. The colonies did not want war. They wanted recognition. They wanted to feel like they mattered to the empire. Changes were made, small things at first, representation in local councils, cultural exchanges, trade agreements that benefited both sides. The unrest began to settle. Emperor watched these developments with tired eyes. His health continued to fail, and everyone knew the end was near. But for the first time in months, he seemed almost pleased. Your human has changed things, he said during one of their rare private meetings. I am not sure if I approve, but I cannot deny the results. He is not my human, father, he is my husband. The emperor raised an eyebrow. Is he? I thought he was your punishment. Hesitated. A year ago she would have agreed without question. Now she was not so sure. That night she found in the garden again, sitting beside the silver pool. She sat down next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. My father is dying, she said quietly. I know, I am sorry. When he is gone, I will have to lead the empire. I do not know if I am ready. Turned to look at her. In the moonlight his human features seemed softer, almost familiar. No one is ever ready for such things, he said. But you are not alone. You have advisors, you have allies, and you have me. You would help me after everything. I told you, you have my protection. That includes protecting you from yourself if necessary. She laughed. It was a small sound, surprised out of her before she could stop it. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. "You are a very strange human. And you are a very interesting." He smiled that familiar smile. "Maybe we are not so different after all." She did not answer, but when she returned to their quarters that night, she did not pull the curtain close between their spaces. And for the first time since their wedding, she slept peacefully. Emperor died on a morning when the sky turned gold. His passing was peaceful, his final breath a whisper that echoed through the great palace like a closing door. The bells of mourning rang across and billions of bowed their heads in grief. Stood beside her father's body, dressed in white, the color of endings. Her face was calm, but inside she felt like she was falling through empty space. She had prepared for this moment for 300 years, and still it felt sudden, still it felt impossible. Stood a few steps behind her, silent and respectful. He had offered to stay in their quarters, to give her privacy in her grief. She had asked him to come instead. She was not sure why, but having him there made the weight a little easier to carry. The succession should have been simple. Was the eldest child, the heir designated by law and custom. But nothing in the empire was ever simple anymore. Her younger brother arrived for the funeral, with an army at his back. He was taller than broader, with cold eyes that held no warmth. He had spent the last century commanding the empire's military fleets, crushing rebellions and conquering new territories. The generals loved him, the soldiers him, and he believed the throne should be his. "Sister," he greeted her at the funeral reception, his voice carrying to every ear in the hall. "My condolences on our father's passing. He was a great emperor." "He was," agreed carefully. "It is a shame his legacy must end in such disgrace." Eyes moved too, standing quietly at side. "A human consort, a defeat to a primitive species. Father must have been so disappointed in you." Whispers rippled through the gathered nobles. This was a challenge, direct and undeniable. "Our father understood that times are changing," replied. "The empire must change with them." "Change?" laughed. "You call this change, I call it weakness. You let a human defeat you, then marry him instead of accepting your shame. You send diplomats to colonies instead of soldiers. You listen when you should command." He turned to address the hall. "This is not the way. This is not the way of our ancestors who built this empire with strength and will." More whispers. Saw nobles nodding, saw generals moving closer to her brother. The military was on his side. Much of the old court was on his side. If it came to a direct vote, she might lose. "What are you proposing, brother?" she asked. "I am proposing what should have happened months ago." Drew himself up to his full height. "Dissolve your marriage to the human, take a proper consort, and surrender your claim to the throne. I will lead the empire as it should be led." The hall went silent. Everyone waited for response. She felt Shift beside her, felt his hand brush against hers. A small gesture of support, nothing more, but it steadied her in ways she did not expect. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then we will let the council decide, or perhaps we will let the military decide," smiled coldly. "I have 20 fleets loyal to me, sister. How many do you have?" It was not an empty threat. They had resolved succession disputes through force before. It was ugly, but it was tradition. Looked around the hall. She saw the faces of nobles she had known her entire life, people she had once believed were loyal to her family. Now they watched with hungry eyes, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Then she saw something else. She saw the servants standing along the walls, their faces worried but hopeful. She saw the young diplomats she had sent to the colonies, the ones who had learned to listen instead of command. She saw the traders who had prospered from new agreements, the scholars who had exchanged ideas with human scientists, the artists who had found inspiration in other cultures. These were the people had helped her reach. These were the people who believed in a different kind of empire. "The council meets tomorrow," said. "I will give my answer there." His eyes narrowed. He had expected her to submit immediately. Very well, but do not think that delay will save you. The council knows where true strength lies. He turned and walked away, his generals following like shadows. That night sat in her quarters with. The curtain between their spaces had been gone for months now. They shared the same room, the same table, the same long conversations that stretched into darkness. "You do not have to do this," said quietly. "If you dissolve our marriage, your brother might accept you as empress. You could still rule." As his puppet shook her head, "No, he would destroy everything we have built." "Wait." She looked at him. In the soft light his human face seemed almost, or perhaps after all this time, and human did not seem so different anymore. "Yes," she said, you changed me, you showed me that strength is not just force and dominance. It is understanding, it is adaptation, it is having the courage to be something new. Those are human ideas. Maybe, or maybe they are ideas that belong to no species. Maybe they are just truths that the forgot." She reached out and took his hand. His warmth flowed into her cool skin, familiar now, comforting. "I did not choose this marriage, you know that. It was forced on me as punishment for my failure." "I know. But I choose it now." She squeezed his hand. "I choose you, not because I have to, because I want to, because you are the best thing that has happened to me in 300 years of life." Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I have waited a long time to hear you say that. I know, I am sorry it took so long." "Do not be sorry," he smiled, that familiar gentle smile that she had once hated and now loved. "Some things are worth waiting for." The council chamber was packed when arrived the next morning. Every noble, every general, every important figure in the empire had come to witness the decision. Stood on one side of the great hall, surrounded by military commanders. Stood on the other, at her side. The council speaker called for silence. "Princess," he said, "you have been challenged by Prince for the right of succession. How do you respond?" Stepped forward. She looked at her brother, at his cold, confident smile. Then she looked at the hundreds of faces watching her. "You call my husband a punishment," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I called him that too once. I was wrong." Murmurs rippled through the hall, continued. "1 year ago I lost a competition to a human. I thought it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I thought I was shamed, defeated, broken. But I was not broken. I was being rebuilt." She turned to look at, standing quietly beside her. "This man taught me something that our empire has forgotten. He taught me that power is not just domination. It is not just force and control. True power is the ability to understand others, to connect with them, to adapt and grow together. That is how humans have survived despite being smaller and weaker than almost every other species in the galaxy. Not by conquering, but by connecting." She faced the council again. "My brother offers you the old ways, more war, more conquest, more control. But those ways are failing us. The galaxy is changing. Species are working together in ways we never imagined. If we cling to the past, we will be left behind. But if we embrace the future, if we learn to be partners instead of conquerors, we can lead that change instead of fighting against it." Stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Pretty words, sister, but words do not win wars." "No," agreed, "but they can prevent them. I have already begun. The colonies that were ready to rebel are now at peace, not because we crushed them, but because we listened to them. Our trade networks are stronger than ever. Our alliances are growing. This is what our empire can become." She drew herself up to her full height. "I do not reject my human husband, I embrace him. I choose him not as my punishment but as my partner. And I ask this council to choose as well. Choose the future, choose hope, choose me." The hall erupted in argument. Nobles shouted at each other. Generals exchanged angry glances. The council debated furiously. But when the vote came, it was not close. The colonies voted for. The traders voted for. The diplomats, the scholars, the young nobles who dreamed of a different empire, they all voted for. And when the final count was read, was declared empress. Left that night with his loyal generals, retreating to the outer territories to build his power for another day. He would remain a threat for years to come, but his moment had passed. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, stood with at the window, looking out at the purple stars. "I could not have done this without you," she said. "You could have," he replied. "You just needed someone to remind you of who you were." "And who am I?" Turned to face her. He reached up and touched her cheek, his warm fingers gentle against her cool skin. "You are Empress of the woman who lost a bet and found herself, the woman who turned punishment into partnership," he smiled. "And my wife." She leaned into his touch. "I like the sound of that last one." "So do I." Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. Somewhere across the galaxy, humans were meeting for the first time, learning from each other, building something new together. It had started with a bet. It had grown into something that would change the galaxy forever. And at the heart of it all, an alien princess who had thought herself perfect had finally learned the most human lesson of all. That sometimes losing is the beginning of winning. And sometimes punishment becomes the greatest gift.